and that is what we will do as a Conservative government. Thank you.
The government can't give you anything it hasn't taken away. They have no money over there. All the money they spend belongs to other people.
Yes.
There's only 3 ways that they can extract it. And they do it by taxing, by borrowing, or by inflating. This government has done all 3. It's incredible. The finance minister admitted just weeks ago that deficit spending leads to inflation. It pours fuel on the inflationary fire. This was an admission that was a long time coming. I have to admit, I was waiting anxiously. It only took her 3 years after I started warning her about that.
You did.
Slowly but surely, a group of random liberals started to agree with me. First, it was the governor of the Bank of Canada, who had originally predicted deflation would result from his money printing. He came around to the view that inflation is caused by government deficits and money printing. Then, it was a former Liberal Deputy Prime Minister, John Manley, said all this spending is going to drive up the cost of living. And then it was another random Liberal, Bill Morneau, the former Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, who's become Bill No More, who said that we would have inflation as a result of all of this spending. And then finally, the Finance Minister we have now came out and said, spending money we don't have drives up the cost of living. It was a wonderful epiphany. And we thought that weeks later, it would translate into a budget that would show responsibility with the people's money. But instead, after they doubled the national debt, adding more debt than all previous prime ministers combined, they decided to dig even deeper. Let me share some of the astounding facts that my shadow minister of industry has dug up about this government's financial plan. The budget sets cumulative spending for the next 5 years at a record $3.1 trillion. That is bigger than the entire GDP of Canada. If these numbers are to be believed, and remember, you can't believe almost anything they project, and if they don't add more spending, they admit that they plan to add another $130 billion to our debt. The debt will rise to $1.3 trillion. Interest on the national debt is this year $44 billion, rising to $50 billion under this fiscal plan. To put that in perspective, they have literally doubled the amount that Canadians have to spend on bankers and bondholders since the Prime Minister promised that interest rates would stay low and there would be no cost to all this debt. We now spend more on interest for debt than we spend on our military, more than we spend on child care benefits, more than we spend on transfers for education and social services to the provinces, almost as much as we spend on health care. So instead of giving the money to soldiers and nurses, this Prime Minister gives it to wealthy bondholders and bankers. Yep. Exactly the opposite of what he promised. They're promising, Mr. Speaker, they're admitting that the spending this year will be a staggering $456 billion. This is an increase of 63% since the Prime Minister took office just 8 years ago, almost a 10% year-over-year annual increase in spending. And if you believe their projections, spending is set to rise to over $500 billion over the life of this 5-year plan we have before us. That will mean they will have literally doubled government spending. Doubled it. What is twice as good in Canada today? Can you think of anything?
Exactly.
Are our streets twice as safe?
No.
Wow, you just have to look around you this week to get an answer to that question. Where a father stabbed to death in broad daylight at a Starbucks in front of his kids for asking someone not to blow smoke from a vaping instrument into his children's face. A 16-year-old stabbed to death on the Toronto transit system by someone who had multiple prior criminal offenses. 2 young people have been stabbed, one of them killed on Calgary's transit in the last 36 hours from the time I stand and give this speech here today. Violent crime has increased by 32%. Gang killings have gone up by 92% under this government. So we haven't got twice as safe streets under this twice as costly government. We got twice as affordable housing? No, exactly the opposite. In fact, the average mortgage payment has doubled. The average rent has doubled. The average required down payment to get into your home has doubled. We haven't got better health care. The time it takes to get treatment has gone up to 26 weeks, which is double again what it was when this Prime Minister took office. So what are we getting for all of this money? Every time we stand up and highlight problems that are raging out of control in this broken country of ours, the Prime Minister stands and defends himself by bragging how much money he spent. It's incredible. It's like saying, you know, he got a car, it breaks down on the road, the air conditioning doesn't work, one of the windows was broken when he drove it off of the dealership, but don't worry, he paid $200,000 for it, so it must be a terrific car. That's how Liberals judge success, by how expensive they can be. They have no common sense. The average single mother would do a far better job of managing this budget than this Prime Minister does, because she understands budgets don't balance themselves. But the good news is that we're going to turn the hurt that he caused into the hope that Canadians need. We need to bring home a country that works for the people who do the work, my friends. That means bringing home lower prices by eliminating the inflationary spending, deficits, and carbon taxes. We know the more money chasing fewer goods always equals higher prices. We need to reduce the burden of government on the shoulders of people to bring down costs and bring home more powerful dollars for people to purchase for a better life. We're going to bring home more powerful paychecks. By ending the war on work, this Prime Minister has unleashed a war on work in this country. You know, at some income levels, when you earn an extra dollar, you lose as much as 89 cents in income tax, payroll tax, and clawbacks of benefits that governments give out. We wonder why people don't want to work. We wonder why we have a labor shortage. If you tax labor, you get less labor. We have become a country that does not reward good and does not punish bad. You know, a hard-working person puts in an extra day's work, they lose it all to clawbacks and taxes. A criminal goes out in the streets and commits a violent crime, they pay no penalty. We don't differentiate between good behavior and bad behavior, and that's why we see everything coming crashing down across the country and in the lives of everyday Canadians. We need to reward the good work of the hard people who work hard, pay their taxes, and play by the rules. And that's why a Conservative government will reform our tax and clawback system to make work pay so that people can once again bring home powerful paychecks in this country. But bringing home powerful paychecks means we also have to get gatekeepers out of the gatekeepers who prevent those paychecks in the first place. The brilliant immigrants who come to our country ready to contribute, but then are prevented from working in their very professions. Right now, we have a doctor shortage of 40,000 doctors. We have 19,000 immigrant doctors who are banned from working in our hospitals. Most of them are qualified to do the work. I had to help one doctor who had been doing heart surgeries in Singapore get his license to practice here in Ottawa. Singapore, I hate to break it to you, is actually a more advanced country, yes, a more advanced country than Canada, and yet we block someone like that from doing surgeries at the Ottawa Heart Institute. Mr. Speaker, we have 19,000 foreign-trained doctors that could be helping in our medical system, but for these government gatekeepers. 34,000 foreign-trained nurses blocked from working in our healthcare system. And it's not just doctors and nurses, it's all professions. We had the head of the Aviation Association testify that there was an aviation mechanic working for Air Canada in Munich for 20 years. And then he moved to Canada, assuming he'd just keep his job with Air Canada. But they wouldn't let him do the same job on the same planes that he was doing in Germany. This is insane.
Yeah.
A Conservative government, led by me, will bring in a common sense blue seal standard, a national merit-based test that will determine who's qualified and who's not, so that our internationally trained professionals can take a test within 60 days, get a yes or no based on their proven abilities, and get to work in their fields. We'll back up 30,000 small study loans so that our immigrants can take time off work to study up to our standard, and we will make it possible for future immigrants to this country to begin preparing to get licensed to practice in their field before they even arrive in Canada, so that our immigrants can have big, powerful, inflation-proof paychecks, and we can have more doctors, nurses, and engineers. Bringing home powerful paychecks means getting the gatekeepers out of the way of our resource sector. We have the sixth biggest supply of lithium on planet Earth. This government now wants to spend $80 billion on subsidies for so-called green businesses. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we could actually harvest the lithium we have in this country and put that lithium in the batteries of the future, rather than relying on slave camps in other parts of the world and dictatorial parts of the world, or relying on China to refine 60% of all the lithium that comes to surface? Do you know how much lithium that we mined in Canada after 6 years of this Prime Minister in 2021? Zero, not a nothing, not even a tablespoon of this stuff. Why? Because by this government's own admission, it takes up to 25 years to get a mine approved in this country. No wonder every other country in the world is leaving us in the past. We're also, we could be shipping our natural gas overseas. There were 15 proposed natural gas liquefaction plants on the table when this Prime Minister took office. 0 have been built, even though the Americans have been able to build 7 in the exact same time, and the Germans were able to build an import plant, including through the application process through the final construction, in 194 days. We could be shipping our gas overseas. When I'm Prime Minister, we'll remove the gatekeepers, deliver fast permits, build natural gas liquefaction plants, cool that gas down to minus 161 degrees Celsius, ship it over to Europe to break the European dependence on Putin, and over to Asia to break the Asian dependence on dirty coal fire. We'll turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people in this country. And we're going to bring homes that people can afford again. It's hard to believe that housing was cheap in this country 8 years ago before this Prime Minister. You could buy the average home for $450,000. $450,000 were all it costs. The average mortgage payment was a reasonable $1,400. The average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Canada's 10 biggest cities was $1,100. What is it now? Well, the average mortgage payment is now well over $3,000. Double. The average down payment required for a minimum down payment of 5%, $45,000. It has doubled. And the average rent is now $2,200, also doubled. Now, why is this happening? Well, there's 2 obvious reasons. Inflationary deficits are driving up interest rates on mortgage borrowers, and local government gatekeepers are blocking construction from happening in the first place. That is why we have the fewest houses per capita of any country in the G7. In fact, according to Scotiabank, we actually have fewer houses today per capita than when this Prime Minister took office. In Vancouver, the cost of government gatekeepers and red tape is $650,000 for every single unit of housing. We're not building anything because we're ranked 64th in the world for the time it takes to get a building permit. If you can't build houses, you can't house people. They want to bring in 500,000 people every single year, and they have no idea where they're going to put them all. They are setting us up for a massive financial and social catastrophe over the next 2 years, as people have nowhere to live and nowhere to go, and we are going to see a massive breakdown in our communities as a result of this policy. Luckily, we can get the gatekeepers out of the way, and you know who showed us how? The First Nations people in Vancouver. They actually own, there's a reserve in Vancouver, inside the city of Vancouver. The Squamish people, they took on 10 acres of land. They're building 6,000 units of housing. That is 600 units per acre. Now, the reason they're able to do it is because they don't have to follow the rules of the city of Vancouver. They're their own boss. And they got the gatekeepers out of the way. They did what never would have been possible with these big city mayors. Now, there's been this tradition that prime ministers don't criticize mayors, and we use all of the fluffy language you read in press releases about working together in collaboration and partnership for a better future, all the garble that we're so used to hearing. You're right, you better believe a big change is coming, because I was accused by the prime minister that I would be fighting with the mayors. You're damn right I'm going to be fighting. I'll be fighting to get housing for our people. Our young people deserve to live in a home, and I will be putting in place serious financial penalties for big city mayors who block housing construction, and big building bonuses for those that get out of the way and allow housing to be built. I will, yes, absolutely. We'll bring it home. We will not be shoveling. Their solution is to shovel another $4 billion into municipal bureaucracy so that there are even more gatekeepers to block construction. My view is very simple. I will pay for results. Their infrastructure budget from the federal government will be based on the number of keys indoors. The houses will have to be finished, and there will have to be people moving in for every dollar they want to get in federal infrastructure money. I will require every federally funded transit station have high-density apartments built around and over top. Why is it that Hong Kong is the only profitable transit system on planet Earth? They sell the air rights right over the stations so that people live right on top of the transit, and that is the most effective way to do it. But in Canada, because of the gatekeepers and the rich, leafy neighborhoods filled with champagne socialists don't want anybody else living in the neighborhood and want the transit station all to themselves, that's not going to happen anymore. If I'm going to fund transit stations, I'm going to require that working class people are allowed to live next to them, and that they'll be able to live there without even having to own And we've got these big ugly buildings. 37,000 federal buildings. Most of them are actually empty with people working from home. These big, ugly, empty buildings, they are shrines to the incompetence of this government. I will be selling them off to developers so that they can be converted into low-income housing. And it warms my heart to think of the beautiful family rolling up in their U-Haul to move into their wonderful new home in the former headquarters of the CBC. And we're going to honor the trades. We need tradespeople who can actually build stuff again. So we're going to make sure, unlike liberals who turn their nose up at working class tradespeople, we're going to make sure that trades and apprenticeships get the same support from government that universities and professionals do. We're going to accelerate bringing in more tradespeople from abroad, and we're going to make sure that young people are told that working in the trades is every bit as honorable and prestigious as working in a profession. Our tradespeople are the backbone of this nation. And we are going to bring home safe streets again. We know that the crime and the chaos and the savage violence that has been unleashed across the land is the direct result of liberal NDP policies which have flooded our streets with violent criminals and dangerous drugs. They brought in catch and release, so the same violent criminals get released again and again. You know, the same 40 people were arrested 6,000 times in Vancouver in 1 year. That's 150 arrests per person per year as a direct result of the Prime Minister's bail reform. My government will end the catch and release and bring jail, not bail, for repeat violent offenders. Secondly, we're going to tackle the scourge of drug overdose deaths, which have been unleashed in this country under the policies of the Liberals and the NDP. They told us that they had all the evidence to do the things that made no sense to common sense people. They said, if we only legalize drugs and we use taxpayers' money to give people the drugs, then there will be no more overdoses because we'll be able to guarantee that these drugs are safe. They actually have heroin vending machines that they're funding with tax dollars. They're very proud of it. They say that they're using biometrics so that people can walk up and put their fingerprint out and out pops hydromorphine, which, you know, OxyContin caused the opioid crisis. Hydromorphine is 3 times more powerful than OxyContin. It's almost heroin. And what happens? The users take those drugs, and they find they're not strong enough after a while. So what do? They sell them to kids. And they take the money and use it for fentanyl. So this government is spending, in this budget, hundreds of millions of dollars in additional funds to provide even more drugs that will kill our people. This policy is an unmitigated nightmare. The Lower East Side of Vancouver has turned into hell on earth. The number of overdose deaths is 300% higher than when this Prime Minister took office in British Columbia. And now we're seeing across Canada 22 overdose deaths every single day. It doesn't make sense. By the way, the same disgusting pharma companies that started the crisis in the first place are going to get some of the money from this budget to sell the hydromorphine that will perpetuate the ongoing addiction. The same corporate scumbags that unleashed this crisis by deliberately turbocharging sales and encouraging overdoses with bonuses for distributors who caused them are now getting money from this government to pay for the so-called safe supply of what is nearly a heroin-grade opioid. This is the most disgusting and outrageous policy perhaps the government has ever implemented, and we have a solution. We're going to ban hard drugs. We're going to stop using tax dollars to hand out those drugs. We're going to provide treatment. We're going to make it easier to get treatment than it is to get drugs.
Yes.
And we're going to make the pharmaceutical companies that caused this crisis pay the bill when I launch a $45 billion lawsuit to recover the money from them. That's what we're going to do. We're going to bring home our brothers, sisters, friends, and neighbors drug-free. We're going to restore the hope that anything is possible in this country for them, that there is always a chance at redemption, that anybody can turn their lives around. We have seen what treatment can do. The countless stories that I have heard when I go across the country. I met a nurse in Timmins who she was a nurse, had been a nurse, until she got hooked on opioids in the hospital, lost her job, lost her family, ended up on the street, but went and got treatment and recovery, and now she's got a job as a waitress, she's got her daughter back, she's got her dignity back, she's got her life back, and there are going to be many more stories like that when we bring home our friends and families. And we're going to bring home our freedom. We're going to bring home our freedom to this country, Mr. Speaker. The more government we have, the less freedom remains. This big, powerful government forgets its core responsibility. First and foremost is our national defense. We're going to bring the dollars out of the back office into the front line. Stop wasting defense dollars on big corporate procurement screw-ups, and make sure the money goes into the soldiers, into the hands, and to the support of our soldiers, sailors, and airmen. We're going to end the woke culture that is driving our young people away from the military and restore pride in our armed forces again. We're going to, we're going to bringing home our freedom means bringing back democratic decision-making to this country by fighting against foreign interference, including by introducing a foreign interference registry and stopping foreign governments from interfering in our elections. Our capital is Ottawa. It is not Beijing. It is not Davos. And by the way, I will be banning every single minister in my government from any involvement in the World Economic Forum. We're going to bring home free speech by repealing C-11, which attempts to give government the control of what people see and say on the internet. We think that there are already 37 million Canadian content regulators. They're called the citizens of Canada, and they have the right to decide what they see and say on the internet in a free country. You know, I pointed out earlier that we had a deal in this country that if you work hard, you get a good living and a good life. A deal that, like everything else in liberal Canada, is broken. But it's not the first deal that has ever happened in the history of our democracy. No, the first deal was over 800 years ago, when a spoiled, power-hungry inheritor of the crown, King John, who'd taken the crown from his father, That remind you of anyone? And was overtaxing his people. It was taking away their freedoms, arresting without charge, confiscating without compensation, violating all the rules that we now take for granted. But the commoners forced him to the fields of Runnymede and required that he sign the deal, the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which for the first time brought liberty under the law and made what is now called the state a servant and not a master of the people. That is our purpose here as well. We understand on this side of the House that we are servants. We are not masters. This is the House of Commons, the House of the common people. It is green because the first commoners met in the fields of Runnymede, which was also green. And they were the ones that harvested that field. They are the ones for whom we work. We stand for the common sense of the common people, united for our common home. Your home, my home, our home. Let's bring it home. And so they wanted more, Mr. Speaker. So I just at least I'll move a motion that the motion be amended by deleting all the words after the word that and substituting the following. The House reject the government's budget statement. Yes, that's everything. The budget statement, since it will cost every Canadian household $4,200 and it fails to make Canada work for the people who've done the work. Namely, bring home powerful paychecks with lower taxes, including scrapping the carbon tax. Bring home lower prices by ending inflationary debt and deficits that drive up inflation and interest rates. And bring homes people can afford by removing government gatekeepers to free up land and speed up building permits. Thank you very much.